What a day in the Chiefs Kingdom. Thank you for listening to the Papa Schro Knows podcast. Back here to talk some more Chiefs football. Papa Schro with you. And quite a day, quite a Monday. Interesting Monday to start our week. And yesterday was a very interesting day. Going to jump right into all of it with a lot of news coming for the Kansas City Chiefs, really. And only time will tell what is going to happen. And honestly, just to kind of go with what happened today, I mean, who knows by the time that I put this podcast out, recording Monday night, what all is going to take place from here till then. I wrote a blog about the not tagging, I guess, the Chiefs' decision to not tag Orlando Brown Jr., and within the hour that I wrote that, the Frank Clark news broke. So I know in my newsletter there on Substack, I mentioned about Frank Clark and his cap hit, and that became irrelevant the moment after I posted it. 12 minutes after I tweeted out the link to the newsletter, I tweeted out about the Frank Clark news. So it was right when I dropped that, I had seen all that. So I'd already dropped it and, put that out. So I decided to wait until I did this podcast to kind of address the Frank Clark situation, at least in this kind of form. Here, if you're listening on Substack, thank you very much. Hit that subscribe button for me if you would. If you're enjoying the content that I'm putting out, also Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Podcast, Amazon Music, or Amazon Podcast, I'm not sure. Wherever you're listening from, I truly appreciate the support. And if you're only listening to the podcast and you're not reading the newsletter, you're missing out. papashroKnows.substack.com. Check it out. Subscribe. You'll get emailed every time that I post something. So, getting right into this, I'm going to start with kind of reading a tweet that I had retweeted earlier kind of for this podcast. Just kind of go over a list of things. And this is of Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, kind of a list of what to expect. And the Kansas City Chiefs, he said, kind of expect Hardman and Thornhill to walk, Orlando to get franchise tagged, which this was incorrect. And this was from over the weekend. This one's from March 5th on Saturday, or on Sunday. Attempt to bring Juju back and could move Clyde in a trade, which I'm going to talk about that as well. I want to talk about kind of each of these situations and where we're at now with it. So the Orlando to get franchise tagged, wrong within a day. Kind of crazy to see that the Kansas City Chiefs decide not to tag him. And, at this point, I think a lot of us feel the same way, as Brett Veach is up to something. And for me, I feel like I can't quite figure it out. We'll see. And maybe freeing up some room for, to try to go get a free agent or something. Let's see. So when talking about Juan Thornhill here, this is Jeremy Fowler, saying some teams are looking at him as number 2 safety, a viable option for those who can't afford Jesse Bates III. So his value is probably going to be up fairly well in the offseason, the free agency. And, I don't mind that with Thornhill. I don't mind Hardman. Obviously, you got Kadarius Toney, and that's kind of what Fowler said as well. And I don't really mind moving on to, from either one of those positions. But, I do love what both guys bring to the table for the Chiefs offense and defense. Attempting to bring Juju back, obviously the smart decision, I think. The way Juju gelled in this offense and with Patrick Mahomes, I think it showed very much, especially down the stretch. Had a big Super Bowl. And, I think it's a very good idea to try to bring Juju back, and maybe they're trying to free up some money to try to do that. The Frank Clark thing had to happen. Orlando Brown Jr. not getting tagged, that's $18 million we talked about on the last episode. That would be going directly to Orlando Brown Jr. And I'm going to look into the salary cap as well. We'll kind of go over that a little bit. But, man, just a wild afternoon, really, just getting all this news all at once, bombarded. And so let's go straight into the Orlando Browns situation, as that's kind of where we're I feel where our good starting point is. It's what happened and the news that broke first. And again, I feel like Brett Veach is up to something. I just can't figure it out. And we'll just have to wait and see. It's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be fun to see what Brett Veach decides to do. So after today, at this point with Brett Veach, this was at 3:26 p.m. So let's see. I'm assuming that they're counting Frank Clark or factoring Frank Clark into all this. The Chiefs have $24 million in cap space, which they were negative a few days ago when I can't remember which one that was. But just a few days ago when I looked that up, they were in the negative for that was the I think Back to Work newsletter that I wrote. And it's just we'll see. I don't hate the move, and we'll see. Maybe they're going to try to free up more room to finish this deal out. They have till Monday to exclusively negotiate with Orlando Brown Jr., so we'll see if a deal may get done at that point with Orlando Brown Jr. along a long-term deal. But I don't mind to see where this kind of goes. There's not a ton of value on the market moving on for Orlando Brown Jr. right now, but maybe in the draft. And maybe you could make a splash. If somebody else signs Orlando Brown Jr., the Chiefs, of course, get the compensation pick, and we'll see where that ends up. But, it's kind of tough to me to see who is, who's going to pay Orlando Brown what. And, last year we know it was about, I think, a $22 million a year was roughly where that was going to be at that Orlando Brown Jr. Declined. He ended up getting $16 million under the tag. It would have been $18 million this year, which in the $22 million, it looks like, as I'm looking it up right now, it looks like he should have been here, or he would have been on 23. So he would have been right there at the highest paid. Ish mark, right around what Laramie Tunsil's getting paid, so he would have been right around third, if he would have taken that contract. Orlando Brown, 16.6 on the books for 2022. That made him the 10th highest tackle paid in the league in 2022. So at least still top 10 money. With the tag. So not tagging him for 2023 will be interesting to see what they want to do. I'm not 100% convinced that the draft is their one, their go-to, what they're planning. I still kind of think the plan is a long-term deal with Orlando Brown. Maybe they're closer at, getting that done than we know of. I don't know, though, because I haven't heard a word out of any type of negotiations or anything like that. So we'll just see we'll just have to see where that goes. And then going on to the Frank Clark situation, man. So this one was rough. If you know me, you know I'm a huge Frank Clark fan. And, ever since that run in 2019, just Frank Clark has been my absolute favorite Chief on defense. I feel like I've had a few, I think 3 real, favorite players just the whole time I've been watching the Chiefs. And as a kid, Priest Holmes was that Chief for me. He was the best running back in the league, I feel like, for those few years. And when I got into football and first started watching, Priest Holmes was the Chiefs running back, and it was during that time and era of, I think the first season I really watched football was 01 or 02, right around in there. And just Priest Holmes at that time, I mean, he was just on another level. And the diving over the offensive line, just how good he was, at making stuff happen, and in the receiving game. And then Tamba Ali after that has always been one of my favorite Kansas City Chiefs. Just everything that the pass rusher that he was, and that time with Justin Houston and Sac City and all that. That was pretty cool. And let's see, just the aura Tom Ali gave off, the dark visor and just kind of like that old school type vibe to Tom Ali was also like just what drew me into Tom Ali and then Frank Clark. I mean, Frank Clark, man, just 2019 and the all the trash talk and just like the way he is for the locker room and just the guy he is. I mean, I feel like he is just that guy to uplift that defense and really be a leader in that locker room. And I think the Chiefs will miss him if he does end up moving on. And not to say that the Chiefs won't be successful and the Chiefs defense won't be successful. And you also got to think but Chris Jones is going to want a new deal. We'll see what kind of money that they're going to end up having to pay Chris Jones. And looking at, Aaron Donald is averaging 31.6 a year. So, I mean, Chris Jones at $20 million right now. I mean, and this is just the average per year on their deal. And so, I don't know, man. I don't know if the idea is just to pay Chris Jones big money, which this year he was actually a little more than Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald was $27 million, Chris Jones $29.4. So, he came into this year with a huge cap hit. We'll see what kind of contract Jones will get next if that's the move. And maybe that, we're freeing up some money to make that deal. I don't know. I mean, this just feels like a really tough call to me. And I plan to continue mock drafting. So I'm planning to get another one of those out this week and go through. I'm just going through the combine now and trying to figure out what the hell my strategy is going to be now at this point, I think, after all the news of Monday. So definitely going to get something out, though, by the end of this week on a mock draft and kind of go through that again. But the combine's been fun to watch and kind of, see some guys that I was, starting to kind of track and think that might be good fits for the Chiefs. So, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. $24 million to play with. That's going to be interesting to see. And that's as of right now. So, I don't know. We'll see. In a little bit of other news, I wanted to go over this. Derek Carr got a deal done with the Saints, and I think that's good to see. I think that Derek Carr gets a little bit of a bad rap for his time in Vegas and Oakland, and I've always kind of been one that, I do think that Derek Carr is a solid quarterback and, with the right pieces around him. And, at the same time, he's had a lot of different coaches out there. And I guess under Gruden, he was kind of starting to, I feel like, get in a better zone. And, when they had weapons that were working for him, I mean, Henry Ruggs was a really good weapon there for a minute, and, you just can't keep guys on the field, due to off-field issues, and, it happens. But Derek Carr, I feel like, has kind of gotten the blame for a lot of, other people's issues in that organization. But, as Chiefs fans, I think we know that organization has some issues. So it's a 4-year deal with the Saints, and I'll be interested to see, how does that change the NFC South? And $150 million, $100 million total guarantees. So, I mean, that's a big deal for Derek Carr. And obviously it shows how the league feels, I think, about Derek Carr. I think the league believes in Derek Carr to a degree. In a team that needs a quarterback like that, I think that's a good deal for the New Orleans Saints. I mean, they're quarterback short right now, possibly. I mean, we'll see what happens with the New Orleans Saints. I think that that window is definitely probably closed for a shot at a title, but I do think they can definitely compete in that NFC South. Obviously, with I mean, what else you got really? You got Carolina, the Bucks without Brady, and the Falcons, which the Falcons are an interesting team. Watching the Falcons and watching some Falcons tape, and I can't remember what game that was. Maybe I can't remember who I watched. Maybe it was the Bills. Did the Bills play the Falcons? I don't know. But a week before the Chiefs were playing somebody, I can't remember exactly who. They played the Falcons the week before, and I watched tape on whatever team it was against the Falcons. And the Falcons are a very interesting team, and I like their offense and the way it's set up. Obviously, Mariota is what he is. I mean, I think he's a backup quarterback starter if you really need him. And a team that I thought if Lamar Jackson was at the helm of that Atlanta Falcons offense, the way they run that would be extremely exciting and extremely beneficial. And one thing about Lamar Jackson, and I guess I'll just go off on this tangent for a minute about Lamar Jackson. We'll talk about him because he deserves to get absolutely paid in Baltimore. If Baltimore really wants to keep him around, I mean, he does deserve to get paid. It is tough and kind of sucks that he's been hurt the last 2 years because I feel like as an organization, I would definitely point that out because, how do you give somebody so much guaranteed money when they haven't proven they can play a full season in the last couple of years? But, when Lamar Jackson is on, I mean, that's a tough team to beat. It's still one of the better teams in the AFC, and the last couple of years with Lamar being hurt, obviously, they haven't been up there in the same conversation with the Bills and the Bengals and the Chiefs, obviously, at the end of the year in these conversations, but they absolutely still can be with Lamar, a healthy Lamar. So just going back to that Falcons thing, if he were to go anywhere, I think Miami or Atlanta would be really good fits for him, which, I think Miami would be definitely a really fun fit to watch, just a bunch of track stars basically going at it with Hill, Waddle, Lamar Jackson. That would be a fun offensive to watch. And with Mike McDaniel calling plays, I mean, it'd be a very fun offense to watch. But back to the Chiefs. So, Clyde Edwards-Helaire drawing some trade interest from a couple of teams at least around the league, which kind of looked around and I have not seen anything of who these teams are. I've seen the different articles everywhere, but I have not seen where any particular team has been announced. But Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reported this. Some teams have Chiefs running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire on their radar as potential option this offseason. Fowler explains that he doesn't believe the Kansas City Chiefs are actively shopping Edwards-Helaire around the league. However, he says it could be more of a we will listen situation. Edwards-Helaire hasn't lived up to expectations in Kansas City, but he was clearly a very talented running back entering the NFL. The expectation is that the Chiefs will not pick up his fifth-year his option in May. And Edwards-Helaire is just 23 years old. He was the first-round pick for the Kansas City Chiefs in 2020, and his third of his fourth year. He got $10.8 on his rookie contract that included a 5.4 signing bonus. The contract includes a fifth-year option for the Chiefs to pick up in 2024. In 2022, Clyde Edwards-Helaire appeared in 10 games for the Kansas City Chiefs and rushed for 302 yards on 71 carries. It's 4.3 carry, 3 touchdowns, adding 17 catches on 23 targets, 157 yards, and 3 more touchdowns. So Edwards-Helaire was productive this year. And, as a backup to Pacheco, I definitely like him. And, obviously you having Jerick McKinnon as your kind of swing back and, pass blocking back. Man, if you haven't seen Jerick McKinnon on some of the blocks that he's made in this past season, you need to go get you a YouTube video and check that out. I'm sure somebody's got some good clips of Jerick McKinnon blocks because he was cleaning up in the backfield this year. But with Clyde, I feel like that role's interchangeable. I mean, we have Pacheco. You got, what am I just talking about? Man, my brain. McKinnon. And, you have room for a third guy that, kind of gets in on the mix. And Edwards-Helaire was good for that. But I feel like if you can kind of pick something up, and if you're planning to move up, even just picking up a little bit of draft capital out of Edwards-Helaire, I think would be terrific. And, yes, he has not lived up to the hype. But I think that is partially the Kansas City Chiefs' fault. I feel like he should have been treated way more like a receiving back completely throughout his time, because I feel like, out of LSU, I feel like that's a lot of what I heard. He was going to, such a good receiving back. And, but until this season, I feel like I haven't really seen him play with the same fire that he did early on in the season, and knowing he was fighting to keep his job. And, that will put, light a fire under you, but I would love to see if Clyde Edwards-Helaire could play with that intensity all the time. And I feel like it was very rare to see that from him before early in the season, when we heard about Pacheco all the time out of training camp. And we heard about Pacheco in these preseason games. He was playing really well and, came right in and played well. So, him taking over that starting role felt inevitable, and Edwards-Helaire was trying to keep that starting role, and, definitely gave him, fire to play like he hadn't. So, I mean, I think that's pretty much it for me right now, but I wanted to get this out. Huge salute to Frank Clark. If this is it for Frank Clark, he is a legendary Kansas City Chief that one day we will be, putting up in the Ring of Honor. And I think at the end of the day, Frank Clark did everything that we needed him to do to come out with a success on that trade and on the contract. I feel like, a lot of people don't, kind of what I talked about last time, how I feel like I give a lot less flack to a guy that can step up when it counts and when it matters, and Frank Clark was that guy. In the playoffs, you could always count on Frank Clark. Now, in the regular season, Frank Clark definitely had his times where, you didn't know who was out there, really. And there was rough times throughout his tenure in Kansas City, for sure. But the way he played down the stretch, going to Super Bowl 54, different level. The Tennessee game and the AFC Championship game, I mean, Frank absolutely sealed that game with a huge sack. And, that was the day that dude became my favorite Chief on defense. And, the stretch that he had this season heading into Super Bowl 57, not as much of a factor in the actual game, but down the stretch against the Bengals, the Jaguars, huge games for Frank Clark. And so, ironically today, a few weeks ago, I ordered Frank Clark Super Bowl 57 jersey, and I hadn't received it. And I was really starting to get kind of worried that I just was not going to get it. And I was almost to the point where I would just kind of accepted the fate. Well, I come home from work today, and on Monday evening, and there's a package sticking out of my mailbox. And I'm just like, there's no way. Get it, open it up, sure enough, Frank Clark jersey. the day it's announced that the Chiefs would be releasing Frank Clark, I get my Super Bowl 57 Frank Clark jersey. And, with Tamba Ali, I never got a Tamba Ali jersey. And at some point, I'm going to fork over the money to get me a Tamba Ali jersey. I never did, in his final years. I knew his final years was kind of coming around, and I never ended up doing it. And I had told myself, I was like, this year I have to get a Frank Clark jersey at some point. And I was not going to let that happen to me again with another one of my favorite Kansas City Chiefs, to not, get that while he's still, technically I guess not with the Chiefs at the moment, but, we'll see. I am a little optimistic that maybe Frank Clark does come back down the road for a different price, and, none of the details have come out on what the asking price was from Frank Clark's side, what the Chiefs were kind of thinking. So we'll see. But I feel like I had to do a podcast just kind of somewhat of a farewell to Frank Clark, and this Super Bowl 57 team is, now we're getting to decisions being made, and things happening, the ball getting rolling, and it's like, okay, it's over. We're moving on, and the goal is Super Bowl 58 now. With this from here on out, we are talking about Las Vegas, being in Las Vegas next February. So I'm all for it. I'm on board. We'll see what happens. But thank you, Frank Clark. Amazing run in Kansas City. And, people will say what they want, and I understand. But at the end of the day, Frank Clark helped the Kansas City Chiefs win 2 Super Bowls, go to 3 of them, and 4 straight AFC championship games he's been a part of. So hats off to Frank Clark. And Orlando Brown Jr., hats off to him. If this is the last time we see him in a Kansas City Chiefs jersey, it was Super Bowl 57, where he allowed no sacks against the most feared defensive line in football. So hats off to him as well. And, appreciate everything Orlando Brown did for this organization in the short time he was here, if this is it for him. But, like I said, Frank Clark is one of those Ring of Honor guys. I can't wait to, be there one day, see him hopefully, be the drum honoree, putting up his name in the Ring of Honor. That's always a fun thing to do every year, no matter who the Chief is, I feel. And, but yeah, that does it. We'll see what happens in this free agency period and what Brett Veach's next move is. I'm excited. I think it's going to be a fun week, especially with the Orlando Brown Jr. negotiations will end up on Monday on another team's desk. So we'll see what happens with that. Thank you if you listened through this. I apologize. I've had a little bit of a sore throat today, so I feel like I sound a little funny. We'll see on the other end how this comes out. But appreciate you rocking with me if you are. If you're listening on Substack, like I said, hit that subscribe button for me. Get notified when I post anything, newsletter, podcast, all that. If you are not and haven't checked out my Substack, papashironos.substack.com, check it out. I try to put out at least a couple of newsletters a week, and getting the podcast up and going. So I appreciate the support. Check out the Substack. Give me a rating on Apple or Spotify, and follow the podcast. Again, appreciate all the support, and we'll see you again real soon.